right, aloha and good afternoon. We are the first panel after lunch, which we fully recognize, but this is the epic hour of energy efficiency, folks. So, yeah, I mean, come on. My name's Caroline Carl, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hawaii Energy Programs, and I'm thinking we're going to get a few more people in here as the minutes tick by, but I'm incredibly honored to be here with my panelists, and I am going to pass it over to them in a moment, but I have Melanie Islam, who is the Principal and Sustainability Director at Mason Architects, Brian Kealoha, who is the Chief Growth and Impact Officer for VEIC, and Alana Kobayashi Pakkala, who's the CEO and partner of Kobayashi Group. And today, I am really excited about energy efficiency, as I am every day. We know this. But I really, as I was reflecting on yesterday's conversation, multiple conversations, and today, and what we bring to the table today in this discussion, affordability continues to resonate. This is a conference about solutions. We talked a tremendous amount about distributed resources yesterday, utility scale solutions, but at the end of the day, what we're talking about is serving our communities and our families and ultimately all of us in our built environment. And that's where, when we think about solutions, energy efficiency is an ongoing, has been and will continue to be an incredibly important solution for affordability as we move towards these goals. A couple of things came up yesterday, which are, we have to balance in our thoughts. We heard about how multiple times, and we all know, we have the highest electricity rates in the nation. But then it was also raised the question around energy burden and ultimately how in the residential setting, we have some of the lowest kilowatt hour usage in our units, in our residences. So when you think we don't have extreme temperatures, we don't have heating, so it seemingly is like, what else can you do? Like, we're doing a good job. We've saved, that even in the Hawaii Energy Programs, we've saved billions and billions of dollars on electricity bills through programs, working closely with the folks on this panel. But then just 5 days ago, we all saw the Civil Beat data drive post about how since 2019, the increase in shut-off announcements or shut-off issues has been tremendous. It's triple, I think, since pre-pandemic. So, and what's even more than that is that they noted that between August 2023 to 2024, 1 in 4 Hawaii residents found themselves unable to pay part or all of their energy bill. So just that alone, there's obviously more that we have to do. Efficiency remains an opportunity, and today we're really going to explore how it continues to be a critical solution. And we know it may not get the same press, and I'm not here to claim that we're going to efficiency our way to zero demand. Like, that's not going to happen. But what I am leading with is we have to continue to make space for the energy saving, energy conservation, energy efficiency discussion, and how programs need to evolve to meet these changing needs, and how we ensure that our built environment is housing our kama'aina, our families, our children going forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my right to Brian, just to share, all the panelists to share a little bit more about themselves, their work, and how they're thinking about this complex dynamic between energy efficiency investments upfront and affordability. Brian?
All right, thanks, Caroline. Aloha, everyone. I know it's a little bit hard coming off of lunch, but Caroline got the crowd going. We'll try to keep it going here. I'm the Chief Growth and Impact Officer for VEIC. And for those of you who are not familiar with VEIC, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary next year. We're a nonprofit that's really focused on driving building decarbonization, transportation decarbonization, really with an emphasis to ensure that over half of the benefits that are coming from these programs are helping low-income and disadvantaged communities. Our genesis in Vermont was the beginning of the Efficiency Vermont program, which is a third-party program administrator Similar to Hawaii Energy, where it was an energy efficiency utility with the goal and the task to drive energy savings and really operate as a utility. Since then, the concept has expanded even further. We operate a program in the District of Columbia, the sustainable energy utility there, which incorporates far more than just efficiency. We're bringing in solar and solar for all programming and more of the demand management components of this. So it's really evolving, and I'm excited to be here today to share a little bit more about some of the things we're seeing across the country, and then what does it really mean for folks here in Hawaii. We are in an affordability crisis. Nobody needs to be told that, we know that. But I think oftentimes in our space, in our energy space, we often are very myopic in that conversation, and we're talking solely about electricity bills or energy bills. And the affordability crisis is much broader than that, right? When you look at why residents and families are not able to make it here, it's the overall cost of living. And as we start to address the affordability crisis, we have to be careful that we're not putting different ends and goals of what we want to have happen against each other. And we're seeing a little bit of that's happening in the energy and energy efficiency space, where even building codes are looking to be pulled back as we try to push affordable housing. And what I'm excited about this panel is we're going to talk about ways you can do both, where you have to really have the right alignment in everything that we're doing so that we can have both outcomes and ultimately drive affordability here in Hawaii. Hawaii's not alone in grappling with this. We're seeing this in states across the country, particularly in the Northeast, where VEIC is based, coming off of a winter that was very rough, coupled with natural gas supply issues and just the overall macroeconomic environment that we're in right now. Legislators are moving towards this quote-unquote affordability agenda, and things are looked at with a new lens, and how much are you going to spend on X versus Y. And it's really important for us to understand the benefits that energy efficiency can bring for the long term, that the people who are living in their homes, in their businesses, are seeing the cost savings year over year. Just a couple of quick notes I wanted to put out there is, I think, in one of the panels yesterday, Stacy Alapai shared a little bit about what do we need to do to be different? How do we look at things that have been institutionalized for so many years and do things differently? And when you look at energy efficiency in Hawaii, for every dollar that's spent, and somebody who participates in that program, they're going to see $25 worth of benefit over the lifetime of that measure that's installed. When you look in California, where they've done some studies around even non-participants for the entire rate base, that number is 8 to 1. So for every dollar spent, you're seeing $8 in benefit to the entire grid. And it just begs the question, are we doing the right things in terms of how do we set up the programs, energy efficiency programs, for success? Because as I think we get into this here a little bit, you're going to hear the challenges that are really faced as you're going through development, and the need for flexibility, the need to be innovative, the need to have security and assurances of funding is really important. And the model in which energy efficiency programs have evolved over 40 years is we spend as an industry over $9 billion on evaluation, measurement, and verification for what's on your bill as less than 1%. I mean, if we had EM&V for rail, maybe we might not be in the predicament that we're in. But we spend $9 billion on trying to make sure that programs are meeting certain cost effectiveness tests. And it's time to look at that. We need to make sure that things are cost effective, but we've evolved now. Energy efficiency has been asked to be so many things, whether it's energy savings, whether it's resiliency, flexibility. Now we're talking about affordability. We need to make sure we prioritize the benefits and what we want from the efficiency programs, and then measure and manage the actual costs that are associated with that, and allow for more flexibility for us to really be able to evolve. So I've said enough for now. I'll turn it back over to Caroline.
Yeah. Melanie, I'd love you to share a little bit more about yourself and your work.
Of course. Brian, you've, I think, taken over, talked about our whole topic. So I'll keep mine brief. I'm Melanie Islam. I'm a principal architect and sustainability director at Mason. We're an architecture firm based in Honolulu, but we've been practicing in our state for over 40 plus years. And a lot of the work that we do is about ensuring that Kama'aina can stay here, Kama'aina can live, not just in the housing, but in also our commercial and our long-term clients. And the basis of all of our work really began with how do we reimagine reimagine our place through existing buildings. And in that core has always been sustainability and efficiency, right? Because we understand that if we can obtain those two things, then those are realized savings for the owner. And that provides long-term affordability. And that's really the lens that I hope to bring in today's conversation. As an architect, we're really charged of working with our clients, working with community, working with government to find solutions that are not only practical, but help to meet our larger community governmental goals, right? And in Hawaii, we know that housing is a big challenge, and every aspect of sustainability, resiliency begins to sort of funnel back to this core problem. How do we solve housing? And the one thing I hope we can glean from this conversation is looking at how we can partner to provide solutions for that. It's not just the government, it's not just private entities, it's not just communities, because there's only so many incentives and carrots in which we can offer, right? And so it's coming together to a common goal of we want to create a healthier, more affordable place for community to thrive and continue to grow. How do we do that as a collective community? So those are things that we're hoping to discuss further today, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to just briefly turn it back to Carolyn so we get more conversation.
And I'm going to pass it right to Alana.
No, thank you so much. I'm Alana Kobayashi, Pakkala. I'm the CEO of our family-owned real estate development firm. We only do business here in our home, and we're third-generation business. For me, why I'm here, I'd like to just say, for me, there was a distinct moment when this became essential and really important. It was 2019, and I met Dr. Chip Fletcher. Anyone spent time with Dr. Chip Fletcher? Yeah, he's awesome, incredibly depressing, spending time with him. So I left a briefing on climate change regarding one of our projects that was supposed to be an hour. It went 4 hours. I went home. I literally cried. I held my kids. Things got to change. We can't keep on doing the same thing and expect things to get better. And so, what do you do when you're depressed? You either give up or you just try to dig in and see what can you do, right? So I had to ask myself, what can I do? How can I move the ball forward in any way that we can through our work? And so we have distinctly shifted our focus. I mean, we always were committed to best in class and good work, don't get me wrong. But now it's an essential part of all of our developments is asking ourselves, how can we make it lighter on the environment? How can we improve energy efficiency? How can we improve the long-term affordability for our residents? But at the same time, I had just taken over as COO and running all of our developments from our former partner. And at the same time, we were also distinctly committing to affordable housing, so a space that we candidly had not been in since my first project when I was 27 years old, Kapolei Kai, and a 204 home, a starter home project in Kapolei. And we've been doing other kinds of work for quite some time. And so we started getting active in the LIHTC income restricted rental space, and then started really focusing on workforce housing and started asking ourselves, can this home be a place where the spirit of Aloha lives if our kids can't afford to live here? And if the only way to end up here is to go to the mainland and be able to come back with the savings to call this place home. And so we committed first internally because we just didn't even know if we could get it to work. But we said, we should commit to try to develop one affordable housing unit for every market rate to luxury home that we develop ground up moving forward. And now, this is 7 years later from that, goal. We have 2,067 homes, either recently completed or currently under construction, of which 60% are affordable, 55% for sale, 45% for rent, and then 40% market. And it's like an ecosystem of housing is the way we're kind of looking at our development moving forward. But with that, finding the balance between sustainability, or really energy efficiency, and affordability is a constant battle. And yet I have so much optimism. I think we've been able to achieve some pretty exciting things just by deciding to be focused on it. But I think, like Melanie was saying, I think in the act of really digging into it, we're trying to figure out ways that we can help to foster conversations regarding incentives or carrots rather than sticks. If the solution is just to mandate, yeah, we'll get somewhere, but you'll just see less housing. And fundamentally, this problem is much broader than energy alone. It's about affordability. It's about how can we create enough homes and high quality homes for our local people. And so, we would really, I'm excited for this conversation. I've really enjoyed our conversations and learned so much during the prep. So thank you.
Thank you. I really just want to dive right in, and I think starting at the very beginning is usually a good place to start, because, Brian and I have lived in the program support design world for, like, how do we craft incentives and what are we doing to, meet the needs early on, and frankly, I know for my experience, our new construction programs, we have missed the mark because we're behind already, it feels like, in a lot of the discussions. And so mainly for Melanie and Alana, can you share just a little bit more of those major considerations out the door, conceptually, how do we start at the beginning to ensure you're starting to grapple with the best long-term operational choices when you're starting with the concepts?
Do you want to go
Sure,
first?
I'll start. I think it first really kind of starts with kind of assembling the right team, right? Ensuring that you have the partners that have alignment with the goal of your client or the broader community it's serving, and have the right tools in their toolkit, right? And a lot of it's not just knowing the technicality behind it, how to do it, but being flexible and open-minded to sort of finding solutions. That's really where it starts. Because what we find, in this market where construction is so high, we have such a small workforce, both in the construction field and in the professional field, ability to make change at an effective rate, economic rate, is very hard as you get further down design. And those opportunities begin to diminish. So it's really at the beginning understanding what your team is, who they are, what they can offer, and also understanding what can be offered by our various partners with the government, with the community, because we need to find those targets and have those targets kind of establish how we further refine and execute our goals moving further. So that's just one little piece.
No, that's a really good point. The team is key, and for me, I had the great opportunity of starting 3 new residential developments right after this big awakening, I guess. And so each with different teams, different engineers, and different segments of the market. One is an income restricted rental, 60% AMI, the largest LIHTC rental in the state, 405 homes. One is a workforce and market rate development, a high-rise in Mo'iliili near Iolani School called Kuile, and then one is a luxury development. But the thing that was to me the most exciting thing is if you start from the beginning, and we have amazingly talented engineers and architects in our island that are so passionate about this, they just need to be asked and told that it's a priority, and they understand about costs. We all know we have the highest construction costs, we're limited on land, there's all the problems that make it hard, but if you start from the beginning, there's opportunities. And so from, starting from the lens of life cycle analysis, cost estimating, and instead of looking at first cost in only of what can I afford, let's look how much is that decision going to cost in 40 years, then come back and is that the right decision today, and can you shift your priorities to make something, in general, energy efficiency is more expensive. Higher quality systems are going to cost less in the long run. That's kind of like a given. But if you look at it and you really understand what's out there, you can make the right decision by changing your priorities as to where you're going to spend your money. And so that was probably the biggest thing for me. And then I would say also leaning into the opportunities that just exist by our land, and citing an example would be our Alea project in Kaka'ako, purely by our architects who are, sustainability is in their DNA, they're passionate about it, WRNS, and led by a local partner, Adam Woltag, siting the tower along the trade winds, adjusting the facade to take in air for passive cooling, and then aligning lanais, only focused lanais on shading the building. All of those moves alone reduce the heat gain into the building by 30%. And that's a one-time cost of lanais and then a no cost of siting. I mean, the building could be really any orientation, but that orientation in particular allows us to have homes that are just not going to receive that heat, so that AC is not fighting that every single day, plus the opportunity with fans in the rooms where you could live without AC. So it's knowing that you can't slap on these at the end, or you can make some good decisions at the end, but fundamentally the greatest opportunity is starting from the beginning and saying it's a priority. But the realities are you can't do all things for every market, right? You got to seek what is the best possible choice that I can afford for this segment of the market. But to say that point, the outsized cost of your utilities and energy for our lower income community members, obviously that's the most important decisions to make, and yet it's sometimes the harder decision because you have smaller budgets, and so it really is. But I would say from our actual projects that are completed and we have residents living in them. Our first light tech rental, Hale Kalele, we worked closely with Hawaii Energy and they were such a big support. That project, our residents right now are using about half the kilowatt hours of a typical Oahu condominium, and that really came down to looking for all those energy efficiency opportunities, and it makes a huge difference for those residents. So.
And just taking it a bit further, because it's easy to think like, that's a high rise, it's apartments, or it's condos, like it all kind of looks the same from the outside. But I know, Melanie, you had shared like working with clients and figuring out that, what is the goal for this property. There's also a tremendous there's a tremendous amount to consider in terms of, are these going to be rentals? What is the ownership structure? What is the long-term ownership plan? And that, Alana, I know in our work together, that has significantly affected what gets crossed off the list of priorities, right? And so I don't know, Melanie, can you just share a little bit about how you grapple that with any developer? And then I think, Alana, in your experience, like, because you've shared, like, yeah, it may be only $1 million, but that's the first one on the chopping block. So.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. I think, when we look at our solutions for housing, scale is very important because the solution that is offered is appropriate for that scale, right? Based upon the goals that the developer has. And so we find that with the market rate housing, it's always about the first cost. And it's very challenging because it's always then baked into that sale cost to prove, that energy solutions can work, right? And oftentimes we find those to be, in our experience, detached single-family homes. And it's very hard to make a detached single-family home with the current incentives that we have to perform the way that we want it to perform, right? You can bid in all the efficiencies you need, but I think the way that we want to see the solution to ultimately reduce that utility cost for the homeowner is to find a layer of renewables that makes sense, right? And so that's where that first step of efficiency comes in. When you're renting and when the developer continues to own that property, then you can find more creative solutions and you begin to see them grow. In the current development that we're working with, it's a workforce housing, and we were fortunate to work with a group that wanted to build in these goals. They felt providing equity and clean energy in an equitable way was critically important. That was something that never got off the table. So we found different creative path solutions through our solar provider, looking at different IRA tax benefits to make sure that that was possible. But before we even did that, we ran with them different scenarios of what does the building envelope look like? How is the building sited? How do we reduce really the initial energy footprint of these units? Because that's where, like Alana talked about, once you can kind of bake in really all this basic core passive design that all the practitioners in Hawaii know about, because it makes sense for our mild climate, that will then ensure that any fixture or measure that you put in, it's going to have some value of economic return. So I think it really depends on the scale of the development, right? who it's for and what it's trying to achieve. And it's all a case-by-case situation. There is no one-size-fits-all solution because every demographic is different, every county is different, every building type's different, or housing type is different. And so you have to be creative. And then the markets constantly change, and so your solutions have to adapt to that along with the adaptation of our codes. So.
Yeah, and I'll chime in on that in terms of, I think an example that I think is a really good one is centralized solar hot water, right? And so you generally don't see that in market rate housing. You may see it in luxury and ultra luxury, and then you actually ironically see it in apartments because if you're the long-term owner, it's the right decision. But because we have the highest cost of construction in the country and it's so hard to make any project pencil, every single pricing set that we get to be 20, 30, 40% over budget is not unusual. And then you're clawing back tens of millions of dollars. Well, energy efficiency measures that fundamentally the future owner gets the benefit from, but as a developer, what's industry standard is acceptable is always going to be in the chopping block first, unless you make it a sacred cow. So the example I'd like to share, because it hits on Melanie's comments about scale, is just kind of interesting to me, is that at Halekulele we have 201 homes. We upgraded from individual water heaters in every home, which is typical in condos, to a centralized solar hot water system. It cost an increase of $998,000. That was an equivalent to $5,000 a unit. But of course, it reduces the energy cost to that resident by roughly, and I think that model showed it about 30%. So, but it's a LIHTC development, so we have very low cost of financing, and as long as you can still compete and be awarded your financing, actually you can get that to pencil. So we were able to do that for Halekulele. It's super significant. I think that's probably that's the largest driver of that reduction in kilowatt hours for Halekulele, in addition to Energy Star appliances and fans in every room and all those things. But for Kuilei Place, 1,000 homes, the cost to upgrade from individual water heaters to centralized solar hot water was $1.2 million. So it was about $1,200 a unit. So scale comes into play, right? When you have a bigger scale, the costs come down. It was, but $1,200 a unit is still not a no-brainer. Not a no-brainer when 60% of our homes are sold under the state affordable housing program. They're sold under our development cost. We lose millions of dollars on 60% of those homes. And so that was on the chopping block every time, but we kept on saying, no, that is a sacred cow, we're keeping that. And the interesting thing about it is that $1,200 per unit is repaid to the homeowner within the first year. That water heater would have cost them over $150 a month. It would have, the modeling said it equated to 35% of their electric bill, which is now gone forever. And so it's a no-brainer, but you never see it. You don't see centralized, and I don't know any condos other than luxury that have it, but yet when you're doing workforce housing, it's even more important, right? And so trying to figure out ways, which I think we're going to touch on maybe later, but trying to figure out ways, because I think, many people would immediately go to, perfect, let's mandate it. That'll be the solution. And great, so we'll just make more housing development not pencil, and more projects not be able to afford that because, again, like Melanie said, it's not one size fits all. If it was $5,000 a unit instead of $1,200, if you didn't have 1,000 units to spread the costs over versus 200, it's not the same. And so you have to find solutions and be creative to try to move the dial forward on each project in different ways, I guess. So, I think that for us, that's to me the lowest hanging fruit is really centralized solar hot water. I'd love to figure out ways that we could create carrots instead of sticks to get developers to be able to make it pencil themselves.
I think the carrot and stick conversation is really at the core here. And just taking it back, I know, Brian, you've been spending a lot of time working across the country on, program design and whatnot. And to the point that I just want to double tap, Alana, everything makes sense, but it still doesn't happen, right? Like, it is hard. And so it's one of the biggest challenge from a program incentive design perspective is you put all this thought into like, what's the right number and everything, but all these external factors become such inhibitors. So I would love, before we jump into the real debate over carrots and sticks, I'd love to hear your thoughts. This kind of goes to more of a macro level, and how programs, and really not just programs, but state and the private partners are addressing some of these things with affordability.
Yeah, I think one of the themes you're hearing from both Alana and Melanie is that their decisions or how they were really prioritizing things, they had certain things that were sacred cows, that were things that they knew they needed to keep in the development. This is not the status quo across the development area, right? And so as you're doing program design, it's great that you have folks that are motivated and are wanting to do the right thing, and when trade-offs need to happen, they prioritize the things that are there, but that's not always the case. And even when it is the case, I think we've just heard it still is extremely hard, right? You're still having to make trade-offs and prioritize that. So when you think about program design, you're trying to make sure that you're incentivizing the things that wouldn't necessarily happen, right? Because you don't want to be paying things for things that would have naturally occurred in the marketplace. And you have to know when and where those interventions are going to make the most sense. So we're just talking about centralized solar water heating, and that is not something you can retrofit after the building's built. It doesn't make sense financially, it's structurally, there's all kinds of challenges and issues. So it makes a lot more sense from a program administrator and resource acquisition perspective that we get it done right when the building's built. And within that, I think as you're hearing a little bit more today, it does require some flexibility as we find out that every development, depending on where it is, where it's sited, the density of it, is going to have different dynamics to it, different elements to it. And so the program design has to include this ability to look at what is it going to need to push this over the top, and the surety that you're going to need that the funding and the incentives are going to be there so that we can do that. So it backs all the way up. So before we even get to that central water heater discussion, it's back in that when you're forming that important team, right, and getting the right team in place is what are the right interventions that programs can come in to help with that program design side. Because the further you get in, it becomes much more of what's coming out than what's going in. And I think that's the element the Hawaii Energy programs, help with modeling and other things along those lines. But we need to continue to evolve that, as if we're trying to drive affordability, we know that there's going to be some trade-offs that need to happen, and we may need to incentivize things maybe a little bit more than what we normally would. And this isn't something that, again, when we look at this at bigger picture, Hawaii is not the only place grappling with this, right? We're seeing this in other parts of the country where a lot more of the new construction focus is going within the design team, the technical assistance that's necessary to help model, evaluate, make choices. They don't drive energy efficiency in the moment, right? From a program administrator standpoint, let's say those measures don't ever happen. Then, you start to get measured off of you're spending this money and you're not seeing the kilowatt hour savings. And that's what I mean, where we have to look at how we measure things for success. And we know that some of this will happen, some of it won't, but we have to make sure the program design allows for that flexibility and is not penalized for trying to find solutions that aren't going to fit in the box. This is not most programs, not most programs, a lot of programs you can do prescriptive. You buy this appliance, you get this rebate, but that's not what we're dealing with here.
So taking it back, I think that the centralized solar water is a good example of, wow, Alana, you and your team made it work. Why shouldn't everybody do that? Like, let's just mandate it. That's what we're doing. And, we know it's a good solution, but how do we grapple with, what we were saying about the flexibility needed, and that the mandates and codes, which we advocate heavily for the importance of building energy code, and we're in a place right now where we're because of the emergency proclamation for housing, that is a bit on hold, and there is a lot of concern around codes mandating more upfront costs, but it makes good sense in my mind. We should be doing that. So I want to dig in a little bit on that, and why not just mandate centralized solar water heating? Why not?
Well, I mean, again, I think it just comes down to our greater affordability crisis is surrounding the cost of housing overall, and being a homeowner is slipping out of the grasp of more and more community members that are making the salaries that should be a homeowner. If they move to the mainland, they will be a homeowner. We are the fifth lowest home ownership in a state in the United States, but what's even more worrisome is that we are the dead last in millennials in the younger community that should be homeowners that are now renters or living with their parents, even more commonly in Hawaii. And so, we need more supply, right? Fundamentally, that's going to help with the problem overall. And yet, I'm passionate about it. I would love to see every single building and never see another building developed with individual water heaters. Because not to mention, not only does it cost more, that's 9 square feet. Do any of you guys live in condos? I live in condos most of my life. For 9 square feet is like a pantry. That was almost my daughter's baby room. There was just a crib and a closet, but so that's really, and then you're paying real estate property taxes on that 9 square feet. You're paying maintenance fees on a water heater, right? And it's a huge leak liability, by the way. So it also increases your insurance costs. So it's like the wrong decision. But again, mandating, I really fundamentally, the development community will scream and personally hate me for trying to bring light to this, but the realities is that there are other solutions. At least, there are ways to make it a carrot instead of a stick. So the development community, especially the local developers that I know, are passionately just trying to bring forward housing, and they're trying to bring the highest quality housing they can. They care, but they are not able to get projects to pencil because of the high cost of construction. And so, just one idea that, that we were discussing earlier is that, the counties have the ability to grant something that's incredibly valuable that could make energy efficiency pencil, and it's heightened density. If you do centralized solar hot water, or if you reach a certain energy efficiency in your modeling and in the final building, that you could have increased heightened density. 2 floors in a high rise could potentially, or whatever, every project will be different, but in many cases 20 feet and the commensurate FAR could get you to make that pencil. And then developers would be incentivized to do it. If you incentivize them to do it, it's going to happen much faster, and there'll be more development. And fundamentally, the counties are giving away something that they get paid back for. So that costs nothing. They get paid back in real estate property taxes and GET to a certain degree. And fundamentally, you're creating more housing. So, I think we have to look for ways. Government can't solve everything with money, right? We all can see that, and certainly right now. So we need to find ways that aren't financial, that actually can be self-sustaining to promote more housing and more energy efficiency and affordability focused housing.
You bring up a really good point about, not having these mandates, right? And really what you're alluding to is a level of performance-based codes, right? You say you establish a target in the market, right? Because what Caroline shared, our homes are one of the lowest energy consuming sort of sectors out there, right? So we should be able to optimize it, and we should provide opportunities to capitalize it. If we continue to move, I think, in a prescriptive code manner, we'll start to see that this efficiency will get lost, and these innovations in our housing market, where we want to create really better homes for Kama'aina, will get lost because again, it's prescribing this one solution. So I think it's really looking at a performance-based code that says you have a target of efficiency that you want to achieve. If you achieve this X amount of target through a modeled, outcome, that is part of our energy code, right? You show that to the county, then you're allowed to get these non-financial based incentives, which is realized early in the project, which then gives this sort of surety to the design team, to the developer, that this will really work and we can really deliver on that. And that's a hard thing now in this policy market where everything is changing, right? We can't really put our hat on a solution, right? We have this conversation of Energy Star potentially being gone, potentially all the IRA benefits. That really was a great big sort of welcoming to the building community, right? Because we've been wanting these things for decades and generations, and it was realized. And we could then say we could do these things in our projects and really make a long-term affordability difference for homeowners. So it's being creative on what the solutions look like at the government, at the the community, at the partnership level. And that's why the solution is not just do this energy efficiency thing. It's looking at it holistically. How are we all going to tackle this big problem? Because we all face it to some degree, to some scale in our daily lives.
And can I just chime in on that? Because I think the one thing that's really important is that it has to be easy to understand, easy to execute, and it cannot be discretionary. Because if it's discretionary, you're hundreds of thousands of deep on engineering and you may or may not get it, no one's going to do that. I mean, we might, but that's very rare. And so it has to be something that's known. If you do this, you can get that. Then you'll design to that because that moves the dial. It could make a project work. And so I think that, keeping it simple. And once we have too much housing and we have too much energy efficiency housing, and we go to West Virginia and 74% of our local people are homeowners, then why don't we talk about cooling it down? But this problem is getting worse, not better, and we keep on banging our heads against the wall, talking about talking about affordability as a problem, and yet we keep on guarding the LUO and guarding and making things harder and harder to develop housing, as if that's going to be part of the solution. We have to unlock housing. We have to make housing easier to develop.
So simple solutions, really. I think one of you raised the point about the certainty and the need to get in early and be able to rely on those those incentives. And I would like to dig in a little bit more on the non-monetary piece of it, because Melanie, we were talking earlier. I mean, the ultimate goal is the healthy communities, homes. And so, I mean, what are some other considerations around some of those incentives that are non-monetary, and what does that look like?
Great question. Put me on the spot. Okay, so non-monetary. I mean, Alana had talked about the land use and the density, right? I think other things could really be looking at this synergy between resiliency and sustainability, right? We are in a huge construction opportune time, at least in Honolulu, and I think in other counties as well, right? Those development zones are opportunities for us to sort of bake in what we want to see the future of building, the future of homes to look like, right? And so it's saying, well, if you're close to a transit area, you need to have X amount of density of housing, so you encourage walkability, you reduce car transport, which reduces our carbon emissions. It helps to ultimately support a healthy lifestyle, and all those dollars saved just makes it more livable, more easier for a Kama'aina to survive here in Hawaii. So maybe those are some things that you're looking for. Brian?
Yeah, well, I was going to add, I think non-monetary is important, and I think you want to exhaust as much as you can, because we were talking about, we just have limited resources in Hawaii, and they're all being pulled in different directions, but there is a financial element to this, and I think I don't want to overlook the roles that energy efficiency programs need to play in this. There's a reason why there is a surcharge on the bill. There's a reason why we're investing in energy efficiency, because it's the lowest cost resource to attain. And some of the ways that we can make sure that people that are developing affordable housing have that certainty is, we have some constructs, again, that are part of what our history is. The Hawaii Energy Program operates in a triennial plan for 3 years, right? If you start engaging in the last part of year 3, there's no assurance to Alana that the incentives will be there. Yeah, it'll probably be there. It's going to go through this process. So we have to think about that. We have to think about how can we make commitments, financial commitments that Alana and the industry can bank on, so they feel secure that these investments that they're making aren't going to be yanked out in the last minute. So I agree, we got to prioritize the non-financial benefits because of our limited resources, but we also have to make sure we're spending the money that we have dedicated for energy efficiency in the right way.
And allow for the runway to do that, really, I think. One of the questions from the audience gets into the, that similar vein, and it's a question, I think, largely to Melanie and Alana, but have there been discussions demonstrating the energy efficiency benefit of appropriate increase in development density? So the suggestion is that these benefits could help make the case for bonuses for development density.
Sorry, can you ask the question? Have
there been discussions demonstrating the energy efficiency benefit of the increases in development density? So
well, I mean,
density.
We were discussing it, so does that count? Okay, yeah. I think I think it's really interesting, at least for me, looking at, we have two developments, two high-rises, two 400-foot high-rises. One is a luxury development under a 4.0 FAR in Kaka'ako, and one is a 201H workforce affordable development in Mo'iliili with 1,000 homes. So simple, it's about 40% of the homes, right? But virtually the same lot size, virtually the same construction cost. It's kind of surprising that it ended up that way. Almost the same, hard cost construction, but 1,000 homes and then versus 457 homes. And, scale is really interesting because we are able to bring forward 68 cents. Well, that's our estimate. It's been third-party verified on our maintenance fees, and it's that we invested in high-quality systems, centralized solar, hot water, all LED lighting. Actually, the first of two gray water systems that will reduce the water footprint as well, and all of those things go toward bringing down the cost of housing. And we looked at it because we could have done 2 towers, but it would have cost more to maintain. So we did 1 big tower. And all these different elements, density is really interesting because so many people, there was a ton of, I don't know if people noticed it. There was a lot of backlash against this project, Kuile. People said it was too big. I always think it's interesting when someone says, I'm for affordable housing, but not here, not now, too big. When fundamentally density is the key for affordability, because you're able to obviously spread the costs of a great community across more people. And so, and actually it's interesting, the maintenance fees of Alia are double Kuile. So it's kind of interesting to me. It comes down to FAR. If I could have built Kuile and Kaka'ako, I would have. Because guess what? It's a broader market. There are more people that need homes in the workforce from 80 to 200% AMI than than the 1% that can afford $2.5 million homes. But so developers, I hear it a lot. Everyone wants to blame greedy developers for luxury development, when actually it's FAR fundamentally that creates luxury development. The high cost of construction and high cost of land, you have to charge a lot for that square foot if you're limited to square footage. If you double the square footage, suddenly you can bring down the cost of the home and create more housing. It is, for me, I think, I don't even know if I really comprehended it until I literally saw it on paper and see both developments are 90% sold. I'm proud of Alia. I'm proud of both projects. Don't get me wrong. It's just it's a broader issue. But pushing affordability, you have to bring in energy efficiency. You need density fundamentally.
I'll just add, you asked about an example, and just kind of, I like to read about multifamily housing policy and in the synergy between resiliency. There hasn't been the perfect solution there yet, I think, out in the US, but people are trying to find ways, right? And FAR, density, height is really the biggest carrot that cities have found that they can offer, because that is, like what Alana is saying, is something that they can realize. They can control that financial number and that burn to make it work for their capital stack. And that is what I think is so critically important, is that we have to give not just the flexibility in design, but the flexibility in sort of numbers, the numbers that ultimately a developer and the client control.
Okay. All right. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and there are a few questions here about I have a few questions I want to get into, but I did want to just really have a moment to talk about the uncertainty that we see at the federal level, and as it relates to policy and legislation, and how in your current roles, like what are your near-term objectives to kind of wade through this, and what are you seeing as things that, from a solutions-based perspective, are of immediate priority?
Well, I'll go first. Then I guess, well, one thing, when we talk about affordability, right, LIHEAP is potentially on the chopping block. We know Energy Star is something that's being talked about having that go away as well. And so there's some real implications, again, about what's going to happen in the bigger affordability picture. And I think we have to get ahead of that, because what this is happening, again, when we look at this at an energy level, that means funding for energy is going to be decreasing as states, municipalities have to recover from less federal funding across all the different buckets and other priorities and social services and things that are needed. And so we're going to see less investment in energy efficiency, which is why I think this discussion around the non-financial benefits are really important, because it's not just the uncertainty around the federal funding, we know there's going to be reductions, at least in the near term, and we have to find a way to navigate through that.
I think for us as an architect, right, we can control the building and we can control the passive solutions, right? So knowing the uncertainty that maybe I won't be there, we won't have Energy Star, our goal is to ensure from passive design strategies that we can lower the building footprint. So it's looking more closely at what does a building envelope look like, whether it's a retrofit of a multifamily building or new construction. How much shade are we providing, right? The shade is honestly one of the more cheaper things to do than sometimes improving the efficiency of your window unit, right? Because that is long term. Because we know heat's going to increase, so we need to bake those in. And then ensure that we really design spaces that work with our mild climate. We have a mild climate here where we don't have a lot of extremes between indoor and outdoor. So really taking the basic things that we know are so true in Hawaii. How do we capture the trade winds, right? How do we bring in daylight to reduce our electrical lighting loads? All of these things that make common sense, so that when we do have opportunity to bring in more efficient units, it's just a smaller energy footprint to work with.
Okay, I'll try not to ramble because I wanted to, that made me think of something, so I'll hit on that. Well, first, for Kuilei and Alea, we've designed these buildings. Alea's modeling shows it'll be 58% more energy efficient than code required. I haven't finished the full modeling on Kuilei, but both projects have been teed up to be able to qualify for a massive federal tax rebate, $2,500 a unit. I'm right now deciding, am I going to pay the engineer the $180,000 contract? Because is the money going to be there, even though we know we've designed and that we will meet it? So, because it's a lot of steps to get there. So that unknown, it was luckily we didn't put it in our budget. It was kind of, so luckily, we would have done what we did anyway, but it certainly be very helpful in really tight economic times. We've seen our financing costs double from pro forma to today. Having a project actually start construction, and actually I believe our two projects were two of the largest construction loans in the country in the last 12 months. So it's hard when those programs may not be there. So I guess that the message is you can't budget for it. But hitting on shade, I just wanted to say that because that's what I've learned, and I just find so interesting and exciting is thinking about all the things that you can do that again cost some money. Per square foot, to build a lanai, it costs some money, but fundamentally in the scheme of things, what it pays back to those residents, that shading and that reduction of heat is so significant, and it's forever. It's that passive cooling element, and so you're not seeing many lanais around the city anymore, right? And the LUO in most areas it makes it so if you build a lanai that people actually that it's useful and that does create proper shading, probably counts toward FAR, talking about density again. So it reduces your ability to actually build interior square footage and homes. And so that's going to be on the chopping block, not to mention also the costs. But if you build that lanai and it shades those windows, it makes a super significant impact to the long-term energy efficiency. So it's kind of where we need to talk about getting our LUO to align with our broader goals regarding sustainability and energy efficiency and affordability versus it being, to me, this other thing. I don't really know that and I know there's been a huge revamping of at least Honolulu's LUO, and yet I feel like we're not necessarily talking about the right things yet. And really saying housing for our local people and long-term affordability. And we say long-term affordability, it's not just being able to afford the house the first time. It's that the home needs to have all of the energy efficiency so that it stays affordable. If your maintenance fees skyrocket, and then it's not affordable anymore, right? So.
And just looping it back, because we've had a couple questions in the chat here around, the carrot and the stick conversation and just the role of building codes, because, acknowledging that there is, from the development community, we advocate heavily at Hawaii Energy for building energy codes for the universal access to long-term affordability. Really, it's an important part of something we believe strongly in, and we are met with that resistance about the first cost. And you've shared, Alana, of course, there are all these considerations. And, one of the questions is, well, if there's such, an issue with affordability, why not get rid of codes altogether? So, I don't know.
The codes are there as a baseline to ensure we do the basic good things as humans. I'm sorry, I just have to say that. It's so important. It's just so important. It is the baseline. And like what Brian said, what Alana's doing, what we're doing is above average, right? But we want people to do more above average. And we're trying to find ways, and we need to collectively do it, not just in this one conversation, but continue the conversation of how are we going to bridge that gap of making sure that it's just not the bare minimum in our codes, but we absolutely need our codes. So our firm, I'll just share a bit, is part of the 2030 challenge. We model, we look at it, right? So before there was such stringent code advancement, modeling, building all these factors was actually helping to improve efficiency. But more stringent code adoption has actually helped to move the needle. And when we are starting to model, we're actually only seeing really now maybe a 3 to 4% difference. What that is telling us is that there are limitations in the market, whether it's finances or tech, right? And so there has to be things that help us to get beyond that. And that's really that carrot discussion. It is a hard discussion to have, but it is a discussion that we have to really make these things realized.
Yeah, I mean, I would just chime in. I think it's just trying to see if we can find a little bit of both, right? I think we do need rules. I think some developments that we've seen from, the 1950s shows you that maybe we need some rules. But, I think that, and don't get me wrong, the development community is so used to constantly being blamed for as if the development community has created the housing issue, just as if like utilities have created our climate change. I mean, like it's completely missing the fact that this is an entire ecosystem that has led to where we are today. But how would I say it? I feel that we need the rules. I mean, I'll give the example. I disagreed with the development community. I believe that we need EV charging in every single multifamily, and I believe we need it in affordable housing in particular. And we installed them in our Halekulele rental, and everyone said that we were wasting money. But you know what? And we had 0 EV users when we first moved in, and now we have more than the stalls. And every single one of those residents I've talked to has said, well, I couldn't have bought it if it wasn't here, right? And so that makes me feel like, yes, sometimes us as a development community need some sticks, I get it, but we just need some carrots too, because there is no, I feel like sometimes government believes that there's like a fairy paying for some of this stuff, or that I'm gonna really stick it to the developer and make them do this, but it just goes into the cost of housing. So when it goes into the cost of housing, it just drives up, and it moves away from affordability. So if we can pair these sticks with just some carrots, and again, I don't want to be a broken record, but height and density are the best carrots that, by the way, pay back. So I think that's something we really need to unlock to try to solve this problem.
Yeah, and if I could add a little bit too, and what both of you said, I think there's the element of, again, codes being the minimum, the carrots that are out there, and some of the things that the energy efficiency programs can drive is that's the role, right? It's to take it beyond the minimum and take it to the higher levels, and that's when it gets more complicated. That's where the flexibility is needed to really problem solve across this. And as we do that, right, and we have more examples of this starts to become the industry standard, right? And everybody starts to raise the bar, and then we can raise the bar a little bit more, and there isn't that piece. But if we don't have that floor to work off of, we're just going to be setting ourselves backwards. But again, when you look at the overarching of affordability, our renewable energy goals, our decarbonization goals, we have to have some floors in place.
And we have sadly run out of our time together, but of course, always willing to continue this conversation. I did just want to quickly, I failed as a moderator. Can you do a quick definition of LUO and FAR for everyone? Because we were bouncing around those
Yeah, so, LUO, land use ordinance, so it's basically what dictates what we can develop where and what it can be. And then FAR, floor area ratio, so basically every piece of land has a maximum floor area ratio for that piece of land, depending on its zoning. So if a 4.0 FAR, that development in Kaka'ako is a 4-acre site. 4.0 FAR, we take 4 acres times 53,560 times 4, and that's how much building area we can build. And then, but it's not just the livable area. That would be great, by the way, if we could convert it to just the livable areas. Every stair landing counts. The air in between the elevator, where the elevator isn't on every floor, that counts toward FAR. So there's all of these things that erode your FAR number and just limits what you can actually build in terms of housing.
Thank you. And I think just to close it out, we appreciate everyone's being here with us today and the opportunity to talk about a lot of these real-time solutions and discussions that are happening, and how we're trying to drive incentives to be the gap, to fill the gap at this point. This is tough stuff, but this is our built-in environment. This is why we are generating clean energy to support our well-being. And so that is, a 100% a responsibility for all of us to optimize our energy usage and facilitate this future. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.